Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're connecting from. I want to welcome you to this Transformational Change Learning Partnership working session. I'm Chitembo Bichunga. I'm the Head for Adaptation and Resilience in the Climate Investment Funds, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thank you for joining this collaborative space focused on strengthening adaptation and resilience capacity through innovation ecosystems and learning platforms. Today, we are privileged to have Tom Pursued of Climate KIC, who will share insights on how their work enables knowledge exchange between local practitioners and global policy conversations. I'm looking forward to this session and discussion. I do hope you're also very excited about it. And it will spark discussions on how communities of practice, including the TCLP, can translate learning into investment-ready pathways and transformative climate actions. So Tom operates, the Climate KIC operates as an ecosystem enabler, connecting local experimentation with system-level strategy, investment, innovation, culture development. And so it's going to share insights on how the Climate KIC's role as an ecosystem enabler, connecting local practices with global climate innovation dialogues. That's why today we're going to hear about the Climate Adaptation Innovation and Learning Platform that is funded by the Global Environment Facility, GEF, and the Tanzania Adaptation Innovation Center. So connecting the global connectivity, comparing it with local anchoring, it's going to be exciting. At this point, allow me to call upon Tom Pursued to run us through, and then we'll pick it up from there. Please do feel free to share in the chat any questions that you might have. And we're also going to have a question and answer session, or also just sharing your experiences based on what Tom is going to share with us. Tom, I invite you to share with us what you have for us today. Over to you.
Thank you, Chitembo. Yeah, really good to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'll be talking for about 15 minutes. Like Chitembo was sharing, I'm going to share a couple of examples from the work that I'm involved in and we do at Climate KIC. And a little bit perhaps how our just general approach perhaps is evolving, and perhaps some of the learnings that we are seeing from this type of work that could be useful, perhaps also in your context, and then we can sort of have a conversation afterwards. I've tried to make it as fun as possible, so lots of pictures and stuff. So I'm hoping that I'm hoping to sort of like go through the sort of high level stuff pretty quickly. So if you have any questions or something doesn't make sense along the way, then just drop a question in the chat, or we can talk about it afterwards. So the first initiative that I am going to bring an example of is our adaptation and innovation, or climate adaptation and resilience innovation cluster in Tanzania. We've been sort of rolling out this type of approach in Tanzania for the last 4 years, and the sort of core of our involvement in Tanzania is to enhance the resilience of rural populations and landscapes through innovation and sort of and collaboration. And the key activities that we are involved there are centered around education and leadership, so bringing adaptation and resilience knowledge to grassroots level organizations, youth organizations, primarily women and rural communities, and also leadership training in different ways. And we focus a lot of our activities into bringing more collaboration and creativity between the different actors to strengthen the ecosystem and enable the development of new locally embedded adaptation solutions through ideation, and then sort of like making a network in the community approach. And then very importantly, we also run with the local partners different growth and scaling sort of mechanisms that I'll talk a little bit about into to support the growth and scaling of these adaptation solutions that are up and coming from the involvement. And also this includes then financial support to these. And then the other initiative that we are also involved in, that I'm going to sort of parallelly talk about the sort of interweaving of those two initiatives, is the Climate Adaptation Innovation Learning Initiative, or CAIL as we call it, which is centered around a global conversation in generally private sector engagement in climate adaptation, and the program CAIL is kind of easily told a merging of three communities of practice. One which is hosted by us at Climate KIC, centered around community for a community for adaptation business support programs globally, with a specific focus on the Global South, and two other communities of practice, namely one community of practice which is looking at adaptation and impact metrics, specifically for finance institutions, led by UNEP's finance initiative. And then the Global Adaptation and Resilience Investors Group, GARI, who hosts a community of practice on investors, private investors looking into investing into adaptation. And the idea here is to kind of build a mechanism, knowledge ecosystem that sort of would accelerate kind of the knowledge transfer between these kind of business support programming organizations and intermediaries that are doing local interventions, and then these like global, more high-level conversations. Now, Climate Kick works generally with entrepreneurship support organizations in very different parts of the world. We do this by doing direct technical support programming with 60 plus partners, and also have an open access initiatives kind of category, so that we lend out our program, so to speak, to and work in this way with a lot of entrepreneurship support organizations and intermediaries around the world. And this leads to that we are involved in kind of acceleration and scaling of 800 plus innovations and startups every year. And to complement that, we have also develop a set of learning modules that are sort of rolled out in different parts of the world around climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and also circularity. So this is kind of the broader landscape of what we do. And the rationale for the CAIL initiative and why we saw kind of also sort of an impact pathway to really activate our global community of entrepreneurship support organization was this kind of growing understanding of that there's quite a lot of lack of dedicated adaptation business support programs. There's a lot going on in the mitigation space and also circularity space, but not adaptation. And the general kind of literacy and technical knowledge in adaptation was quite low, and also it's generally seen it's very kind of difficult to fundraise for adaptation businesses. And then we also kind of recognize the unsupported policy environment that the ESOs were operating in, to ask to sort of like also look into it. Now, to hop back to the adaptation innovation cluster in Tanzania, up to date, we've been running our key programs, Climathon and Climate Accelerator, which are the idea competition and acceleration programs in Tanzania, supported with small grants and larger grants, 200 plus innovations, and worked with a lot of youth organizations and hosted a lot of trainings with local partners, so trainers and all kinds of sort of workshops for collaboration that I'll get into a little bit as well. And we have grown with a local partners, a diverse community of 200 members, so all from sort of entrepreneurship support organizations, youth organizations, academia, some local governments, and so forth. And the local adaptation innovation cluster sort of community, which is then sort of bringing together the different activities with sort of acting as a weaver between all of the different portfolio activities that are happening, which is the acceleration program and the climate hackathons and the youth engagement, youth organization engagements, and so forth, is this kind of weaving cluster community that all of is free of charge for everybody, and people sort of can enter these community events per year, two of them, and a network of sharing learnings, opportunities, and webinars, capacity development trainings that are also free, and then very also importantly, access to apply to attend different conferences and so forth. I wanted to also quickly show the logic of the logic of how we work with the whole entrepreneurship sort of development scaling journey. So we have developed programs really for each of the different stages of a startup's an ideas, grassroots ideas journey to becoming an actually bankable business. And here then in Tanzania, we've hosted climathons, climate launch pads, and climate accelerators, and then are looking into now actually connecting with different international investors and scaling opportunities. But the sort of climate safe program and investment fund that we operate currently is only Europe facing. And this is to show then the network of climate accelerators around the world that we are involved in. And this is also then the community of different ESOs running different climate accelerators around the world that we then help weave knowledge of to each other to share learnings and sort of share resources that are being developed and so forth. So this is one of the parts of the learning exchange that we help facilitate. But very sort of importantly, one of the key sort of our own, what we're proud of, kind of evolvement in our role is this weaving of knowledge flows simultaneously more now, simultaneously between the sort of horizontal and the vertical. And we find this really to be a unique opportunity area for intermediaries such as us, also international intermediaries. And that is then to sort of bridge this knowledge in the local adaptation and resilience innovation clusters into the global and regional emerging adaptation economy sort of conversations. And here I have some pictures from our local partner, Larry Io from Tanzania, who's leading the organization that is running the Climate Acceleration Program in Tanzania, being part of our CALE programs, regional roundtable around adaptation and resilience, sort of in creating the enabling conditions from a growing adaptation economy, and in East Africa, in Nairobi, where we brought together a lot of different sort of different roles of people talking about more high-level discussions that the ESO normally would be sort of in their everyday life kind of facing. And the same on the right side here, a workshop of developing working groups for the innovation cluster in adaptation and resilience. Many of the members who were in the founding sort of part of the innovation cluster there have subsequently then been a part of webinars and community practice meetings with the global community around investment funds and climate impact measurement, climate adaptation impact measurement with UNEP. And I wanted to then kind of bring a little focus on Africa just to kind of exemplify the reach of the different programming and what we're hoping to sort of, what kind of knowledge we're hoping to weave. You can see that we are running sort of innovation cluster project that are in 2 countries right now, in Kenya and Tanzania, and then starting just now in Sierra Leone and Madagascar as well, specifically around adaptation resilience, and then kind of having a lot of climate-related projects, like such as climate in different sort of stages of entrepreneurship in the scaling kind of journey in different parts of Africa, and also working with a very large group of entrepreneurship support organizations. So we're weaving kind of locally and also in between these programs, and also in between the different entrepreneurship scaling sort of stages. And the whole focus, of course, is doing everything that we can to sort of strengthen climate innovation ecosystems to be strong on their own, so building agency through small grants and then doing a lot of sort of coordinated the actions together in a sort of portfolio across the whole continent. I wanted to take a little bit of a sort of a closer look into our work with youth and education and youth leadership, specifically as a part of the climate adaptation innovation cluster in Tanzania again. We are focusing on sort of a set of youth NGOs and civil society organizations, bringing sort of young leaders together to strengthen kind of the sort of growth bed to drive innovative and impactful initiatives to address climate challenges and adaptation challenges. So we are doing a specified capacity building journey that is in a way then kind of for the youth leaders to kind of take and make their own and take and free to use for their own kind of programming afterwards. And we work with these 8 youth organizations at the moment across Tanzania. And just to exemplify again, like this kind of knowledge then transfer between the vertical and the horizontal. I brought a spotlight on one of the organizations that has been very active in the innovation cluster and the youth organization in Tanzania, who's been a part of the capacity building journey, Climate Hub Tanzania, who have then subsequently have their own climate literacy program with 80 young fellows. I have launched a local coalition of NGOs in Dar es Salaam driving youth engagement in climate policy, and then have been a part of many global conferences and sort of roundtables, and delivered a keynote in the last COP. Yes, so this is one of the sort of kind of examples of yeah, the vertical and the horizontal meeting. And another success story from an innovation or like a business with a similar kind of meaning, Kesho AI, it was fully sort of our idea that it sprouted from a local climathon in 2024 and has now been a part of the Climate Acceleration Program and is currently testing a sort of an AI-powered early warning system with great success with the grant that they've gotten from through Climate KIC and Smart Lab, our local partner, and is currently traveling to COP again with the Tanzanian government leaders. I wanted to make a quick spotlight on media. It's very important that we spotlight very sort of storytelling about the learnings that are coming out, and the collaboration sort of successes in the media have been wide and are a very, very important part of the sort of agency building that we see on the ground, and sort of awareness building around adaptation and opportunities in adaptation and resilience, and also the sort of opportunities in cooperating or collaborating with through the innovation cluster. And then I wanted to sort of reflect on doing so how do we kind of facilitate through the CALE project knowledge feeding into the community of practice from the local initiatives. Here we host a series of kind of open public community or practice meetings where we then bring together people who are working across the globe in big or small adaptation and resilience programming to kind of have generative conversations around what seems to be working, what seems to be not working, what can be learned between contexts. And we do that then with these sort of public meetings, but also now this fall a little bit with a little bit of a more focused closed cohort where you can see also Timbo actually is as a part of, and this sort of kind of having a local and global kind of network weaving arm it requires new roles and approaches, and therefore also new capabilities within our own organization. And we've put a lot of effort into building the sort of muscle for adaptive management and sort of complexity literacy and sense making for our own team at Climate KIC, since this type of work is very sort of emergent and very kind of yeah, complex, and then requires a lot of kind of co-sense making. Here, you know, things like facilitation and process design are very important, adaptive process design, and very much around how to host generative dialogues and co-creation and co-design. So these are the sort of things that we put a lot of resources into in building in our teams when we are thinking about this type of programming. And I'm realizing that I'm probably over time for speaking, but I'll end up here. Wanted to highlight this community weaving framework that we've been using a lot in our work for the last year or so until this came out, I think, from the community weaving network. I think last year it was put together by Florian Pottmuller and colleagues. It just helps to kind of perhaps boil down some of the principles that we see as very important in bringing together in the communities of practice that we work, and both vertically and horizontally, is oftentimes we're seeing communities being brought together or communities sort of built or woven where collective action stalls, participation is unstable, and relationships feel surface level. So we're through this sort of model how try to amplify these kind of bits and pieces of a healthy community, which is then kind of creating shared visions and goals and making really a lot of time to build trust. Also creating sort of rituals and practices that are co-owned, and then try to kind of always center individual and growth and learning as an individual and a group. So kind of revealing the different levels of learning to make it make sense for people in the community. And we obviously do this with varied success, but this are the kind of underlying principles, at least. Yes, I will stop here. I hope this was some food for thought, and I would love to have a conversation around this.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tom. You've run us through quite a lot in quite a short period of time, highlighting on the practicalities on the ground, what has worked to bring the communities on board. Also, how do we connect with the global conversations, and how do these really make sense for advancing adaptation and resilience building? Just how does it work? How does it all come together? I wouldn't want to raise much of my comments myself. I want to open it up to the community who are on board right now. Any reflections that you have? I already saw a comment in the chat. What's the name? Bharati, would you mind if you can just ask your question, and then kindly do feel free to raise your hands. Any comments that you might have, and then we'll be happy to. Tom is here to give us all the answers, and all of us from our different experiences, how we can make this grow into very successful integration into adaptation and resilience, building all the building blocks that we need, that are necessary to achieve adaptive economies. Bharati? If you're speaking, you're probably still muted. Or she might be having connectivity challenges. Tom, can I read what she has written? Maybe you can start with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so she says there are many good and new proposals within. So let me start from here. I'm Bharati Pathak from Women's Rights and Resources Network, Nepal. Thank you very much for excellent presentation. There are many good and new proposals, community and youth focused. Similarly, I am asking about the Women's Support Program and exposure about this, because rural women have a lot of contribution to adaptation, so need the capacity building support and exposure in different national and global. thanks so much for understanding. So she wants to have, how can we support the rural women with the capacity building necessary for them to contribute more to adaptation?
Well, I obviously, I mean, like, I think there are many ways to tackle this. I think one of the key things that we have learned with the work in Tanzania is that it really begins with kind of establishing a language that is shared. So oftentimes kind of the language of adaptation and resilience building isn't really something that is kind of understood or kind of revealed to a lot of the groups that all these different initiatives are hoping to work with. So the first really part is not really it's not really about teaching the language, but it's creating a shared understanding of what it is that adaptation and resilience sort of could like show up as in the local context. And then what we see a lot of times is that if that is kind of done in a generative dialogue manner, then sort of this helps reveal how sort of what could a person's role as just a like a local community activist or like a small organization, how they kind of fit into these like larger conversations. So it's a little bit, so it's quite a lot of like translating work, I would say, through these conversations. So I think a lot of times what we see is kind of a little bit of perhaps a mistake, which is done as this kind of approach where it's not really looked at as a dialogue rather than kind of a literacy fit kind of where sort of larger organization intermediaries, they hope to kind of involve more local actors, but don't kind of spend time on establishing this kind of shared language in the first place, which then creates a little bit of a divide and an exclusion and oftentimes kind of a siloing as well of sometimes people not really realizing that they even could have agency and being a part of the sort of solution because they don't see themselves in the language. So I think that's maybe the starting block there that I would point to.
Great. We still have questions for you in the chat. But since we still have some time, I was wondering whether Tim Lawson, you would want to just raise your comment. Maybe you would elaborate more other than I reading the question. And then we also have another one from Brendan. Tim, would you mind coming in? And
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Chitembo. And Tom, great presentation. I was just curious on the substance of what's coming out in terms of different types of entrepreneurship opportunities for adaptation and resilience, or ideas coming out of hackathons or some of these networks, if there's any effort to kind of catalog or map these, because it seems like there's probably some interesting patterns there. And I know that there's a lot of efforts to think about more evidence-based use and decision making and development. And it seems like this type of just evidence of what opportunities are working in different contexts and communities. Is there any effort to kind of track that substance and share it?
Yeah, more so now. I mean, this is obviously like the initiative on adaptation resilience, more specifically, is quite new also to us. So we've been putting a lot of focus into kind of establishing the networks and the sort of kind of system of even having access to all of this kind of the different possible solutions and what is coming out. So right now we are working. We have been developing already some kind of some materials into the capacity building modules where we talk about business models based on the business models that we have been seeing through the acceleration programs and so forth. So it's kind of patterning that. And then through the KALE project, we are starting to build sort of a little bit of a platform on UNIDO, our partner, implementation partner, UNIDO's website. Basically, if you just Google UNIDO on KALE, then it will come to that platform there. It is a little bit, there's not so much happening there at the moment, but this is the sort of place where we are going to start funneling the kind of knowledge pieces that are coming out of there. So there are already like articles and some blogs and such from the work, but we're hoping to kind of bring more example solutions into there as well. And then we're working on a publication which is around that at the moment, which is coming up next year.
Great, thanks.
Great, thanks, Tim, for that. Brenda, would you want to come in? I'm not seeing any hands up. If you raise your hand and I haven't seen it, please bear with me. Maybe Brenda, you would want to come in, Brendan.
Sure, thanks, and thanks for the stimulating presentation and discussion. I'm just wondering, I've seen some kind of efforts around kind of innovation that is promising, but leads to more kind of isolated innovations. And I think a collective learning approach is really promising, both for the learning itself, but also to potentially enable collective action that maybe looks for and harnesses some of the complementarities needed to address the more systemic nature of climate change adaptation challenges. So just wondering if you're seeing kind of collective learning translating into complementary and collective action, and whether a kind of systems change framework is explicit kind of behind that approach, or if it's implicit in kind of how folks are kind of learning and adapting as they go. Thanks.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So what I would say is that yes, absolutely. The kind of approach that we're attempting is very much kind of informed by trying to create conditions, the enabling conditions for sort of these root cause kind of transformation pathways to show themselves. I would say that there is no, like, at this moment, I wouldn't say that there is kind of any compelling evidence of me kind of that I could point towards and to sort of that this is actually that we're seeing patterns of this happening. I think the kind of the signals of it are sort of anecdotal, right? But what I do think that is a core kind of tenet of this is that I think in the kind of dialogue spaces that we are hosting, and maybe Chitimbo, you are also a part of this one of the journeys. You can also pitch in sort of the level of where we are seeking to innovate is maybe perhaps going more into the kind of underlying drivers conversation, right? So, and then I think what that helps illuminate with having a lot of the ESOs and the local innovators also to be a part of is this kind of revealing of the system to itself, right? So that I think that what needs to be sort of grown is the awareness of how good intentions can also sometimes perpetuate bad outcomes, right? In the whole system. And then I think that is the conversation that kind of in mass, if to be had, then there is a potential to like sort of really address the underlying root causes, right? And then we definitely see that as a pattern kind of coming forth in the conversation spaces that we are hosting. But how to actually translate that to sort of concrete sort of project designs and sort of program designs, that is that that $1 million question that we're trying to also very much address with this kind of engine that we've built. Yeah, it's a little bit of an unsatisfactory answer, I'm afraid, but it's also a very complex issue.
No, it makes perfect sense. So thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Brendan. I want to add to what Tim has just mentioned. What in the process of learning with the various, what I've liked most is just having the various levels, super global level and very micro institutions. You are all sitting on the same table and agreeing that the challenge we have right now is adaptation and resilience building. And the different roles each of the institutions are playing, or the investors are trying to bring in, or the intermediaries. Coming to the recognition that these are the challenges, the pull and push factors that one sits on, and trying to resolve that together is what is even making it more complex, but very interesting to sit in and recognizing that this is what we needed to be doing much earlier, to be having these conversations between the very local and the very high level. So the horizontal and vertical integration is important. And as Tom already mentioned, they need to build trust on the systems, the processes that we do, the timelines and all that. All these are different discussions that are coming out. I see that we still have questions in the chat. And there's a follow-up question from Tim, but before I go back to Tim, Scott, would you want to come in? Then I can have Tim and Alfredo. Then we can respond to the 3 questions at once, since I'm looking at the time now. Scott?
Did you just ask me to speak?
Yes, please.
Okay, I was just piggybacking on Tim's question, and thank you, Brendan. I mean, Tom, I appreciated your presentation, and what was floating in my head was, so what have you found has really worked with the learning? But a lot of capacity development or learning, knowledge generation, and sharing, that happens, but is it being used? Is there a way to show it's going beyond just learning, but going up the next level into it's being used towards the longer term goal that you're aiming for? And then related to that, the flip side of it, what's been the most challenging or one of the most challenging things to navigate?
Mm-hmm. Great. So from my perspective, the most kind of what kind of works best when it comes to sort of learning, going beyond how we see learning right now is really the combination of the learning space with the agency and community. So often, what I mean by that is oftentimes in programs, and also this is very institutionalized, also what we see in program design, the word kind of learning is treated as almost like a commodity, right? So it's commodified kind of learning, which is kind of this idea that you can extract learning and then put it into a report, and then kind of replicates pieces of that you find necessary, and then you can sort of put together. What we see is that this works in certain contexts, but a lot of times in kind of very complex situations, which adaptation and resilience oftentimes are, this doesn't really like the learning doesn't kind of cascade in the same sort of manner. So what we are putting a lot of effort on is kind of the living part of the learning. So it's like capacity building of the inner agency of the people that are in there, revealing how all the time in the programs and the convenings that we have, the usability of what they are taking away into their own context, and sort of like reinforcing that through all of the interactions that we have. So it's kind of like this meaning making live into your own context, rather than gathering a lot of knowledge and then kind of sort of replicating it. And then, I mean, the way that we see that this is working is like inside our own organization, people being part in the capacity building journeys together with local organizations. They are going about their own sort of program designing in a different manner. And I think some of the kind of examples, with the youth organization in Tanzania also, they are not replicating a program that we have sort of capacitated them to do the train the trainer, but they have made their own program design out of that fits into their context. So that I would bring that as like kind of like one of the indicators that we see that the kind of the learning is having its own life, so to speak. And I think maybe like the biggest challenge is actually the flip side of what I was just saying, is this kind of actually the meeting this institutionalized way of kind of seeing what learning is, which is this kind of commodity, and kind of challenging that with an alternative that has been, kind of a very difficult thing to navigate, especially when we're talking with more the kind of like, for example, UNEP, finance initiatives, community of practice, and the investor community. Then sort of like the idea is much more that we kind of the idea is that not in the institutions themselves don't need to change very much about what they're doing within them. The change is more hoped for to be on the ground, but actually sort of kind of mirroring that there's a lot of times the sort of way that we are treating also learning as an innovating our own practices, like that has been a really big challenge. Because that's I think what is needed when we are thinking about learning. So the system, all of the sort of practitioners within the sort of adaptation space, they kind of need to be open to change the ways that they're also operating. Yes.
Thanks, Tom, for those responses. I have two questions for you, which I'll just read from the chat, and they're building on what you've already mentioned. So the other question is there opportunity to connect adaptation and resilience entrepreneurs with various impact investing networks so that they're able to scale their ideas and new businesses? And examples are given, such as Gary, Sirius Syndicate, Iconic Gene. And in connection to that, the other question is, how do you ensure that the local innovations remain viable and institutionally supported after the initial project funding? Something you've touched on a little bit in the Tanzania case, but maybe you may want to elaborate on that.
So Tim's question around the opportunities to connect entrepreneurs with impact investing networks is right now one of the key questions that we are thinking about, like how to tackle, because I think the initial ideas in working with Gary, and we've also worked with the GIN and network, is that there's quite a big sort of missing space from the ticket size that we are working with until kind of the ticket sizes that are usually in those type of networks. So we're trying to, so we're obviously kind of painfully aware that we're not connected to a lot of the work that that might be out there. So if anybody has some ideas how to kind of help us with that, then it would be great. But there is sort of a little bit of a gap in the scaling journey. As I showed in the sort of journey on the sort of scaling journey picture, in Europe, we have sort of kind of managed to work in that area, which is the sort of like the larger ticket size the investing space between kind of already having a viable business model and having secured the first funding round, so to speak, and then getting like a bigger investing to really scale. But we're still working, and I definitely think that the sort of networks of impact investors looking into adaptation and resilience are the right way to look. So yeah, so answer is yes, and we would love to know who to get, who you know about, who we don't know about yet. And the second question was
it's on how you ensure that the local innovations remain viable and institutionally supported after the initial funding.
Well, again, I guess there's no way of ensuring, but we are, so we host a kind of, we have a community platform that all of the all of our sort of alumni are a part of, and they have a specific kind of mechanism of staying in touch with us and the community that we are part of it on the ground. So what we do is that we use kind of host a lot of information exchange about opportunities when it comes to, you know, funding and further capacity development. And then obviously we hope that the groundwork of putting a lot of emphasis on the weaving of networks and relationships in the local adaptation sort of community between sectors oftentimes, and also between different roles in academia and local governments and NGOs and so forth, that the relationships that have been built up already also act as a sort of enabling environment for the viability and institutional support. So that's more like an enabling conversation, enabling condition that we are sort of intentionally supporting right from the beginning. Yes.
Thank you very much, Tom, for running us through. And there's a question for me, which I'm gladly able to answer. So having been part of the CALE initiative, it's been a very interesting journey. We do have 3-hour sessions, which don't look like 3 hours at all, because it's all fun in the sense that we're all thinking through how does this make sense for me from the organization I'm coming from? In the ARISE program for us, it's very timely because we're speaking to local investors, if I can call them that, most of them, or fund managers at local level, those that connect the women, the youth. And because our ARISE program, its intent is to support sustainable economies, it's bringing out the realization of how do we facilitate that through our implementing entities? How do we connect the dots with what is really the challenge on the ground in the different contexts? And how do we ensure information moves between regions? It was very interesting that one of the regions, South Asia and Africa, they have been working in different spaces around heat, extreme heat, adapting to extreme heat, and different innovations have been developed and are coming up, but they haven't been able to bring them to scale because everyone is working in their isolated areas. So sitting around this table where we're all discussing what we are doing, ensure that the dots were connected, and that is likely to bring that to scale because now it's being linked to different financiers and different intermediaries that can come in. So it's still work in progress. There's a lot of, and I feel for Tom and team because they're getting all of us as ideas which are there moving to different directions, but are also at the same time coming to agree on how do we deal with some of the polarities that we struggle with in the different spaces of work. So there's a lot that we can learn from, and we really hope that the TCLPs can also try to bring some of those kind of learning initiatives where people just freely share and are not asked to go and do as learned, but to go and integrate into their systems some of the learnings that are coming out from there. We have a minute before going, but kindly allow us to thank you for joining us in this call and for having a very interactive session. Our next TCLP will be on December 18th, and we continue to our approach and contributions to country platforms. That's what will be the discussion on that one and how those do drive transformational change. Please do look out for that next call and do join us, and do have a pleasant day and evening wherever you are. Tom, thank you so much for this.
Thank you for the invitation.